Podcaster Joe Rogan is calling out radio personality Howard Stern for being too woke. Rogan said when Stern was the king of all media and he was telling everybody to suck his blank and the FCC was going after him, the government was fining him. They were fining his business, effing millions of dollars. And now he's woke. It's crazy. Is it true, Robby? Has Howard Stern gone the way of the wokeosaur?
What?
I don't know. I'm just trying something new out.
Okay. So I have never actually listened to very much Howard Stern. Mm-hmm. So if he has, I'm not particularly familiar with it. So I looked at what conservatives, anti-woke people are saying. I'm reading this Outkick article that I think the big thing is he was extremely and continues to be extremely COVID cautious, extremely, I guess, even just germ averse. Like Bill Maher on a recent episode said he just expects he'll never see the guy again because he never leaves his house because he's really COVID afraid. And I guess that colored his opinions about COVID, where they would have expected him to be really against government mandated overreach. He was extremely supportive of it. There are some other kind of random things. I believe he apologized for a blackface incident previously.
Yeah, so what's so funny about that story is that apparently, so I don't know if you remember this, Robby. Might have been too young, but back in the day.
I'm getting a lot of the Robby, you were too young this week, and I do not hate it. I do not hate it.
It's projection from how the rest of us old heads are feeling. But okay, Whoopi Goldberg and Ted Danson used to date.
I know that.
Okay, and there was an untelevised award event.
I remember when she did Whiteface at an awards thing.
Well, he did blackface. Apparently, at her urging, they thought it was going to be a funny joke. There are pictures of it. The public found it to be less funny than they did. Now, keep in mind, I think this was the 80s. So the idea that, like, you could do things then that you can't do now. I mean, back then, there was a pretty generalized understanding that blackface was a bad idea. Apparently, Howard Stern, who's kind of co-host kind of person, Robin, is a black woman. They recreated that costume where he was in blackface and she was the Whoopi Goldberg character in this. And he got backlash for that. That was in a television, I think that was back in 1993.
Well, but they were making fun of them for doing it. So it's not really...
Exactly. So his apology is kind of like, he says basically, would I have satirized Ted Danson's behavior and made fun of it if I had it to do again? Yes. Would I do it by literally dressing up as him and like, causing the same offense? No, I wouldn't. I would have chosen it differently. So I mean, like when you look at examples like that, what's the question? Like, are we saying that he's not allowed to have evolved his opinion on that? Are social mores not allowed to change? Are people not allowed to respond to social mores? He's been in this business for a really long time, over 30, 40 careers as a radio shock jock. Is he allowed to mellow out, get older, change his opinion? Is it really that he's succumbing to woke culture? Or is he just like a guy in his 60s now or whatever he is, who feels differently about how he relates to the world?
But I guess there is this idea that people like Howard Stern, who used profanity, who were crass, who discussed race and sex and maybe said offensive things or politically incorrect things, that was important to the pushback against the FCC, against what used to be actual very real prohibitions on saying certain things on radio, on TV, et cetera. There used to be a lot more government prevention of free speech. So there's a long history of using speech that is offensive, not because offending people is good, but because you ought to have the right to say offensive things. And there's like a lot of
porn. Have a First Amendment law.
Porn or the drawing Muhammad, the Charlie Hebdo people. It's not because it's an unqualified good to mock the religious beliefs of Muslim people.
Right.
It's because it's been prohibited, or there are literally people trying to kill you for doing it. So then it becomes a free speech point.
But Howard Stern having all of that pushback because he had a different style 20 years ago than he does today. Does that obligate him to stick with the same kind of humor he had when he was in his 20s or 30s for the rest of his life? I mean, like, what are we really asking of people here? I can look back at things that I said and thought and believed when I was in college that I find to be abhorrent today, because that's what the social mores were. I said things that I don't want to say today because I not because of any social pressure in the world, genuinely don't want to cause people who I care about offense. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be rude.
Google Briahna Joy Gray's college op-eds later.
No, but you know what I mean? Like back when I was in college, people, I mean, I was never really in this camp, but like people all the time made comments about gay people, and gay people were the butt of jokes and used the F word, and almost nobody was out in college. Like, and that was just 15 years ago. Things have changed a lot. And there's a difference between, I think, some legitimate critique of like woke overreach where people who maybe have not caught up with the latest thing and are a little awkward with pronouns or whatever it is, are told that they're bigoted, horrible people who need to be banished from society because they haven't kept up.
Criticism of wokeness.
That's fine. Like that, I understand that critique. But there's this other thing where this wokeness slippage means anybody who evolves or changes or wants to not offend or just wants to be nice because they live in a society and the world evolves or they've grown out of their toilet humor of their youth is somehow being oppressed by like Big Brother. I mean, like, it's
there's that,
ridiculous.
and then there's the university saying no more. It's no longer field work.
Sure, but that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
This is the slippage I'm talking about.
It all gets lumped together.
And I think that it hurts people because it's like there are ways that people change that are good, right? Like, are we saying that we want our social expectations and mores to be exactly what they were in 1956? Mm-hmm. Are we supposed to think, who's the NFL coach that just got in trouble for being in the picture where he was, shouting down all the black kids that were trying to integrate the school? Are we saying if he changed his beliefs from 1956 to now, which he avers that he has done, that's bad, that he's succumbing to woke culture? Or is it good that he's not a racist anymore?
No. I think the interesting thing people are trying to point out here, or people criticizing, maybe it's not being framed the right way. There is something to be said for how the counterculture, the resistance to a kind of conservative or Christian or uncomfortable with offensiveness, the people who are pushing back against that, the counterculture, were liberal, progressive. They were not conservatives. They were not religious. They were people like Howard Stern, and how over time there's been a greater elite association with liberalism and some of the values those people would have had on gay marriage, abortion, race, etc. And now the people who offend and push back against that hegemony are conservatives. So there's been a switch there that is not captured by the whole you've gone woke, but that is nevertheless kind of interesting.
I think that's kind of funny because it presumes that being trans is mainstream or being comfortable with trans issues is mainstream in a way that I think we discuss it like it is, and it really isn't. I mean, there's a small niche part of the country that is welcoming and even in fact laudatory of people who are not gender non-conforming. But I think a lot of that is overstated. So there are plenty of people who are pushing against the system from the left.
That's very true, but it's very celebrated in elite culture.
Yeah, because there's been this
Hollywood,
co-optation of identity politics that I would agree with you. It's hurting the communities that are actually involved because they're getting pegged with all of these ridiculous excesses that I think are not really organic to the community. But the Howard Stern instance, Howard Stern is, what did we say in the read? The king of media, king of radio, something like that. He is the most successful probably radio personality of all time. Maybe now rivaling Joe Rogan in a slightly different medium. He, I'm sure, has millions, if not billions of dollars. He's untouchable. He makes so much money. No one is firing Howard Stern. There was a time in his career when he was legitimately vulnerable to all of those things.
He was vulnerable to the government.
Yeah, right. That time is long behind him. So the idea that now he's making choices that are somehow the product of woke coercion, when he lasted through the decades of being oppressed by the FCC and everybody other kind of government organization, Republican Party having these morality campaigns against him and all of that, it just doesn't seem accurate to me. You
either die an anti-woke crusader or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
You live long enough to see yourself say, hey, maybe I don't love doing blackface 20 years ago. And I don't know that I think that's a bad thing.
You brought up a point before we started recording that I need to reiterate because it's so true. People in radio, now that you and I now find ourselves in a role where we talk a lot. I worked for a magazine previously, you did writing previously. I mean, you did a lot of podcasting as well. Anyway, I'm not new anymore, it's been going on for a year, but understanding the experience of when you do a show like this or radio or podcast or YouTube, you end up talking for a long period of time. Sometimes you end up saying something you didn't quite nail it in your execution of the way you said it, or sometimes your co-host will bring up a point, you don't really know what they're talking about, you respond to it. The more opportunities you have to say anything, the more likely you are to eventually say something that's wrong, or that's bad, or that gets you in trouble. So we're all, you and I just living out here in danger of...
Look, we could be canceled at any moment, Robby, but my issue with the cancellation has always been not that it's unfair to critique things, to criticize things, whatever. People err. But if you don't have a society in which redemption and rehabilitation are possible, then people are never going to admit that they're wrong or grow or anything like that. So the issue with cancellation isn't the critique itself, as far as I'm concerned. What Louis C.K. did, not great. A lot of these Me Too scandals, not great.
But he's funny
regardless. But the question is there an actual what does it look like for someone like Louis C.K. to be genuinely repentant, genuinely make amends, and have a path back to the public eye in a way that feels satisfactory to at least most of the people involved? And if you are foreclosing, if you want to banish people and excommunicate people, I think that is the core problem. Also, letting people back in without any kind of reckoning is a problem. But that's, I think, where we need to be focused on today, not necessarily on whether or not Howard Stern has sold out because he is in the firmly anti-blackface.
I don't care very much about that, but Louis C.K. is one of the, in my view, funniest people who has ever lived. So I would
Howard
love
Stern's pretty funny too.
Comedy. I'm sure he is.
Wokeness aside.
Wokeness aside. All right, we got through that. Tomorrow on Rising, we will have a very reasonable show planned. I think that's a reference to a big magazine cover story that I wrote for Reason that I'm going to be discussing in a bonus radar tomorrow. You won't want to miss it. Got some important special news not elsewhere reported in there. And then my colleague at Reason, Elizabeth Nolan Brown, will also be helping us tackle and understand the sex trafficking allegations against Andrew Tate. A lot of important and interesting conversations you won't want to miss.
I'm looking forward to that. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of this content. And for those of you who prefer to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're also available on Roku and other streaming services. So hope to see you over there.
Don't cancel us.
Don't cancel us yet. See you tomorrow.
See ya.